Last week, Twitter sued the U.S. government to protect the identity of one of its users. This is nothing new, says Kurt Wagner from Recode, who's joining us to talk about it. Welcome back to the show, Kurt.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Awesome.
Doing well. So Twitter revealed last week that the Department of Homeland Security had compelled them to reveal the identity of an account that had been posting critical tweets about the president's policies. Now, the government rescinded their request and Twitter withdrew its suit. You say they've done this in the past. Tell us a little bit about some of the times they've done this before.
Yeah, they have. Twitter has long been kind of this champion of free speech and protecting the idea of an anonymous internet user, which is why I guess their accounts don't require you to authenticate, a real name, similar to like what Facebook would do. There's a number of examples, and I mentioned them in that story that I wrote there about them kind of taking legal action, or at the very least pushing back on these kinds of requests. And they get thousands of requests, every year to go ahead and give away kind of user information, which could be emails or phone numbers or actual names associated with accounts that maybe you or I couldn't see. And they claim that, about 40% of those, they either just simply don't comply with, or they give less information than was originally asked. And then in a few unique cases, they'll actually take legal action to try and defend a user if they feel like information is being requested unfairly. And so I guess the point of the story was kind of point out that we made a big deal about this, this suit last week, and rightfully so. It was very kind of interesting and generated a lot of attention, but it's not necessarily unique to where Twitter stands on this whole issue.
So you've been following the company and its founders for a long time. What can you point to something that makes them so interested in this idea of anonymous free speech?
Yeah, I think part of it has to just do with the way that Twitter was founded and who the founders were and where they, where they kind of rest on this spectrum. Personally, I think like when we look at CEO Jack Dorsey, he's clearly been a big fan of kind of letting free speech flow. And I think he takes a lot of pride in the fact that Twitter is a platform that enables that. I think when we've looked at how they've handled abuse on the platform in the past, there was a story, I want to say it was maybe in BuzzFeed. It was really well reported, just kind of the history of Twitter's abuse problem. And it goes back to show that for years, there have been kind of two camps inside Twitter, those who believe that free speech needs to be defended at all costs, and those who kind of believe that, free speech can only go so far. And there's a certain point where Twitter needs to come in and say these things are inappropriate, regardless if people feel that their rights are being trampled on. So this has just kind of been like Twitter's thing for a really long time. And I think that they see themselves, especially in today's day and age where there's so many protests and there's a lot of movements that happen. I think Twitter feels like the platform for those people. And I don't think that they want to, go away from that, because Facebook certainly doesn't feel that way. So Twitter is kind of, it fills that void.
You mentioned in the article that this has happened a decent amount of times where this kind of outcome of a legal challenge comes along, Twitter pushes back, and they do it in kind of the sense of free speech. But in this case, but a lot of times you don't hear about it. But in this case, I mean, it was very public. Why did they take this one public? Was that kind of a bargaining tool, or kind of like a tool to kind of push it into the public to the point to where it adds pressure so that we get the outcome that we got? And why does that not happen in other situations?
That's actually a really good question. I'm gonna embarrass myself here because I don't have the right answer to that. I don't know why this one was able to be shared publicly, while in the past I'm kind of told that a lot of these interactions are actually under seal by the court. So A, that means Twitter's not allowed to talk about them, and B, that whole process kind of happens behind the scenes. And I'm not exactly sure why this one was different. That's actually a great question. I should try to find that out. But clearly, I think that the public pressure did have an influence here, because as soon as we found out that Twitter was suing the government, there were a ton of folks who started writing about that. And it created a huge kind of wave of support online that, I imagine the U.S. government didn't want to have to deal with, in addition to the fact that they were now going to have more legal challenges to get the information they wanted. There was also now a PR element to the whole thing. So I think it did benefit Twitter to have this public versus private. And I'm sure they would love for more of their stuff to be public if they could, because people tend to support a company that's trying to protect its users, regardless of the reasons why.
Yeah.
So Twitter has been doing more lately to remove accounts from people, and they've been accused of violating free speech, just by other Twitter users, very active Twitter users. Do you agree that anything that they've done, especially recently, is a violation of free speech?
So that was kind of the argument when they have suspended a few users over the years, like permanent suspension. It's pretty rare. I think Chuck Johnson was one user who was suspended. He tried to come back with multiple accounts, and they shut him down. Breitbart's Milo, I'm going to mispronounce his last name, but Milo, who most people know him just as Milo, he got suspended about a year ago, probably for kind of repeat abuse. And a lot of people at the time said, well, hey, this is just free speech. Like, if I want to go on Twitter and call someone a name or say whatever, like, I have the right to do that. And by banning these people, Twitter is trampling on those rights. I feel like I suppose I understand in principle where folks are coming from, but I also think Twitter is it's a community, right? I mean, it's a company that has user guidelines. They wouldn't allow pornography to be shared. They wouldn't allow certain racial slurs or words to be shared. And I think that as a community, you have to police yourself. Otherwise, it's going to get very aggressive and dangerous very quickly. And so I have no problem with Twitter saying, here's the line that we draw in the sand. I think the challenge is I couldn't tell you where that line is, and I don't think any other users could. It feels to me kind of like a case-by-case basis. If there's a well-known user who repeatedly gets attention for things, Twitter has shown that they can come in and remove that person. But I think there's probably a lot of lesser-known users that do that on a regular basis that fly under the radar simply because they don't get the publicity that others do. So I don't have a problem with them saying we have standards in our community. I think that no one fully knows, because that's such a subjective thing to have. I don't think anyone fully knows where that line is. And so that's where the issue comes in.
So there's a piece over the weekend by Jenna Wortham that was in the New York Times Magazine. It was really interesting just about how difficult it is to curb online harassment. It kind of talks about how it's rooted in the cyber libertarianism, John Perry Barlow. And what her argument is that one of her many arguments is that that because internet companies waited so long to deal with harassment, it's a more complicated problem. And I think we can all agree that even though Twitter has been better now, and like you said, it's a very difficult line, and because of their strong belief in free speech, some of them, people that work at Twitter, did not do all they could to curb harassment. Do you agree that because they waited so long, the problem is more ingrained and then harder to solve?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you look at how a community is formed and how you interact with people in different parts of your life, I mean, once kind of a model is established, and once you realize kind of what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, that tends to be cemented in there. It's very hard to change, right? That's why when companies talk about an internal company culture, they'll say, hey, from the very beginning, this was a problem, and then it was harder to change as we scaled up and we grew to more employees. So I think the same thing happens with these social and online communities. And I think that when you look at why someone like a Twitter maybe didn't act earlier, I mean, user growth is a huge deal when you're looking at a publicly traded social community, right? So this Twitter, I'm sure there was a time when maybe they noticed certain things were happening, but they said, well, we can't really afford to, or at least this was the thinking, we can't afford to boot people off because we need user growth. We can't afford to eliminate all these bots because all of a sudden our users are going to look like it's way smaller than it was, and that's not good for business. The problem is, obviously, had they nipped that in the bud from the beginning, maybe they would be even bigger now because people wouldn't be avoiding Twitter because of all these issues. But this is just kind of a theory, by the way. I don't know for sure that this happened, but it makes a lot of sense. And I do think that had they started this a lot earlier, it wouldn't have created the expectation that Twitter was a place where this stuff was okay.
So you also had a piece today about Facebook buying Instagram. It was, or not today, but yesterday. It was exactly 5 years yesterday since they made the purchase. Do you think they got a good deal?
A great deal, an absolutely fantastic deal. I think when you look at, $1 billion to buy Instagram at the time, I wrote, I think they had 30 million users. They didn't have a single dollar in revenue. And even 5 years ago, like a $1 billion acquisition was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And so I think there were a lot of people who were like, hey, what the heck is going on? Clearly, that has been, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, deal in Silicon Valley over the last decade. I mean, they got, I think Google buying YouTube would probably be up there too. But Instagram has 600 million users. We don't know how much money they bring in because Facebook doesn't break it out, but it seems to be that they're bringing in multiple billions of dollars a year, and if they aren't already, they certainly will be soon. So I think that from a simple metric standpoint, it was a great acquisition. But then the story kind of goes on to explain that I think one of the other reasons this was a great deal is that it showed people that Facebook, and specifically Mark Zuckerberg, could operate multiple kind of individual businesses at the same time. So getting Instagram and showing that, hey, it can stay independent and also grow and be successful led Facebook to getting WhatsApp, and led it to getting Oculus, and led it to getting someone, like David Marcus to come in and run Messenger. So I think this was the first example of Facebook being able to do multiple things at once. And that was probably a domino that helped them do all the other things that they're currently doing.
Yeah, I mean, you stole the words right out of my brain about this, just in the sense that it really seemed like the experiment with buying Instagram. Because I remember when that happened, $1 billion seemed like such a crazy number. That was so, and now, just in comparison to what we're so used to seeing now, it's paltry. And you realize the value that Instagram has as a property for Facebook, in the sense that, like, people can be one and not the other. Some people might have problems with Facebook, but they're probably on Instagram. You know what I mean? And Facebook ultimately wins because they decided to keep them separate, foster them individually. What about this kind of conversion of functionality between the two services, though, and kind of between their other properties? It seems like a lot of new features on Facebook are also similar to new features on Instagram. Does that threaten that at all?
So I don't think it necessarily threatens users from using both. What I think that it does, though, is it definitely eliminates kind of the unique characteristics of all of these apps. So I think for a long time, Instagram felt very different than Facebook, even though it was still a photo sharing platform, right? I mean, on Facebook, you might put up 100 photos from your trip to wherever, Disneyland, and you would write about how great the trip was. And then on Instagram, you would really pick like 2 or 3 of the best ones, and that would kind of be like, here's the curated, most beautiful stuff I did. And now those two platforms have added so many features that they both have, that everything has kind of come together. And I think that they feel a little bit interchangeable at times. And I don't necessarily find that to be a good thing. I think I know why Facebook does it. It's because they see that certain things work on Facebook, and so they assume, well, we want everyone in Instagram to have the same experience. So they go ahead and they blur everything together. But I think that from a use case, it just makes it harder for you as the user to decide, where are you building your digital life, right? Are you going to do it on Facebook or Instagram? Do you need both of them? So far, I don't think it's been an issue for them, but I think it could they could kind of compete in a weird way moving forward if this keeps happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they do things that I feel, as a frequent user of both, are intentionally bad for the user because they want to keep them separate. In Instagram, they hide whatever you write about the photo. It used to be more prominent. You could write something about a photo, but now whatever you write just looks like a comment. And I think they do that on purpose, as to compare to Facebook. Like, Facebook is the place where they really want you to write something about your photo, and Instagram is just for photos and scrolling fast through ads.
My guess on that, and this is a total guess, is that Instagram is pretty much exclusively a mobile service, right? So it's unlike Facebook, where I still think there's probably a good number of people who will use it on desktop, although it's clearly more mobile than desktop. But I would imagine that they're saying, hey, there's only so much room on your phone screen. We're going to dedicate the vast majority of that to the actual photo or video. If you feel so compelled that you want to read something, okay, you can click, or maybe it's a little harder to find or whatever. That's a total guess, but I think you're right. I don't think that those kinds of things, in my opinion, are necessarily enough to totally distinguish the two. But I do think it is in Facebook's best interest to try and keep them a little bit separate or a little bit unique, because right now it certainly feels like they're headed in the same direction. They're going to meet in the middle somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kurt, thank you so much for joining us.